السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا ومرحبا بكم in our 11th class already of Fath al Mu'een. ولله الحمد والمنة. We've already tackled so much in the book. We've made such a great advancement. ولله الحمد والمنة. Um, this really puts us at around a third of the way of our current phase of our journey. Inshallah ta'ala, I intend to go through the entirety of the book. We're just starting with Kitab al-Salah, and we'll take a little pause, and then we'll pick up from there, inshallah ta'ala. So already on 11, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, that brings us to almost a third of our journey. Subhanallah. Alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen, time goes by fast. Sadly, it also goes by fast in Ramadan. So, nas'al Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that everyone gets their fullest rewards, inshallah ta'ala, out of their efforts during this blessed month. Let's begin our class. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين وبعد. He says, وَثَانِيهَا, and the second nullifier of wudu. Remember, we started in our last class with the four nullifiers of wudu, and we covered the first one, which is a person relieving themselves, right? In the second one, he says, زَوَالُ الْعَقْلِ. He says, أي تمييز بسكر أو جنون أو إغماء أو نوم للخبر الصحيح فمن نام فليتوضأ. He says, basically, you're losing what? Zawalu tamiz. Tamiz is the ability to, in English we call it discernment. It basically means the ability to recognize what's happening around you and having control over yourself. That's basically what tamiz refers to. Awareness of what's happening around you and control of yourself. Tamam. Now, he mentions many different ways that a person loses this ability. He mentions sukr, intoxication, and when they use the term intoxication, that would also include like anesthesia, right? It would be included under that. It would, even though later on works would call that takhmir al-aql or taghdir al-aql, but when the classical ulama, when they say sukr, it would include that. Tamam. Wa jununin, junun is insanity. Ighma, it means to faint, even the lightest fainting. When blood pressure drops and you get a slight faint and you wake back up, that also nullifies your wudu. That's also included. Tamam? أو نوم, or sleep. Now, bear in mind, the adilla is strong and is explicit for sleeping. For the other ones, it's by necessity. This is called min babi awla. Because if sleep nullifies wudu, then all these other states that are greater than sleep would also then nullify wudu. Okay? And that's how the Shafi'iyya will assign dalil. They'll say, and sukr, junoon, and ighma is qiyasan ala nawm. Bel, like Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari says in Fath al-Wahhabi Sharh Manhaj al-Tulab, he says, as a matter of fact, they're even greater than sleep. So, min babi awla, meaning if sleep does it, then they would as well. Now, when it comes to sleep, our dalil in it is the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, al-aynani wika is-sah, faman nama falyatawadda. A-sah means like a container. And usually they would use the term with like a leather container that you'd use for water. And it's the Prophet ﷺ is saying, Al-Inan wika'sah, meaning the lid of the container. The eyes are the lid of the container. فَمَنْ نَامَ فَلْيَتَوَضَّأ. Basically, if the lid of the container is gone, everything dumps out. If your eyes are out of the picture, out of the discussion, meaning you're asleep, then you need to make wudu because you're no longer in control of yourself. Like if the lid was off of the container, things would spill out. Why? What's the issue? Because basically it's not about urine, it's about passing gas. That's basically the number one issue. When you're asleep, you could pass gas. Now there's other possibilities, but that is at the top of the list. The other possibilities that come about, you touching your private area when you're asleep, not paying attention, Tamam. And that's another major one. But the primary reasoning that we say this about sleep is because of this hadith, is that you could pass gas when you're asleep and not realize that you've done so. Tamam. Now, bear in mind, it's not the sleep that nullifies the wudu. It's the state that you are in while you are asleep that raises the possibility of you nullifying your wudu. Tamam. طيب. But in usul al-fiqh, that's called madhanna, a probability, a possibility. And when it comes to madhanna, we don't normally give it ahkam. We definitely do not say something is najis based upon a possibility. Never. We would never do that. Imagine you had one bucket for wudu and you had it, I don't know, in the middle of a warehouse. You walk into the warehouse to get that bucket of water so that way you can make wudu. And there's a dog sitting next to the water. Okay. Is the water dirty? No. Is it possible the dog put his face into the water? Sure. But did I see it? No. Therefore, I will not consider the water najis. That's normally how we treat things with a possibility. However, because when you are asleep, there's zero control, there's zero signs that you can tell if something happened or not. They treat it like a yaqeen, like a certainty. And this is one of the few situations where in fiqh we will actually treat the madhanna like a ma'inna, treat the possibility like a certainty. This is very important to understand. Sleep does not nullify wudu. It's the probability that is present, the high probability that is present, and the lack of the ability to determine if something happened while you were in that state is the reason why we say if you sleep, you have to make wudu. Tamam? He says, وَخَرَجَ بِزَوَالِ الْعَقْلِ النُّعَاسِ. And when we say zawal al-aql, this does not include something like nu'as, feeling sleepy, yawning, and your eyes are all watery. That's not included. As a matter of fact, Imam Shafi'i mentions this in Al and in other works, and there's no khilaf that feeling sleepy is not equivalent to sleeping or fainting or anything like that, and therefore feeling sleepy, even excessively, does not break your wudu. وَأَوَائِلِ نَشْوَةِ السُّكْرِ. So imagine you took some Tylenol PM. Now, PM means that the medicine has something to put you to sleep, but you're hard-headed. You're hard-headed. What does that mean, you're hard-headed? Meaning that a pill or two doesn't really impact you. And you took the PM so you can get a good night's sleep. You're getting sleepy. You're getting a little woozy, but you're not asleep and you're not fainting. You're not intoxicated. You're just a little off. It's just a little bit off the edge. That does not nullify your wudu either. Tamam. He says, كما إذا شك هل نام أو نعس. Same would be for, and this is a nadhir. Remember, we spoke in our previous class and classes, we said that when we get a nadhir, a similar scenario to a scenario that's being mentioned, we will say, hey, this is a nadhir. So if you have the book or if you have things printed out, write nadhir. And I think I just remembered that I did not share the translation. I will do so inshallah ta'ala today. It's done, I just didn't share it. Afwan. But you might find some of this in the previous file though. So, إذا شك هل نام أو نعس. You're in doubt. Was I just really sleepy or did I actually sleep? You did not break your wudu. Because the qaida, remember the bucket of water? Tamam. I said what? Al-yaqeen la yazulu bishak. And he's going to actually end this section with talking about the qaida because this is a very important qaida in fiqh and in the chapter of tahara in particular. Afwan. Na'am. Okay, so as I said, what is sleep? Sleep is you're losing the ability or awareness of yourself or that which is around you. With feeling sleepy, that does not happen. Tamam. Al-Qadi Hussein al-Marwazi, he said, sleep removes your ability to recognize your surroundings that helps you understand what's around you. Imam al-Haramain, he said, and sleepiness, you will still always understand what is happening around you. Now, bear in mind, understanding what's happening around you does not necessarily mean that you understand what people are saying around you. Just people, you know that people around you are speaking is suffice. Knowing what they're talking about is irrelevant to the discussion. But to add to the benefit, Al-Qadi Hussein, he says, an insanity is the presence of your strength and functions with the inability or the lack of awareness of your surrounding. So you have no awareness, no rational thinking, but you might have your full strength still present. Al-Imam Shata in I'anat al-Talibin, he says, an intoxication, it means that the mind has ceased its proper functioning. Basically, your motor skills are not working and you're having a problem in your speech. He also said, and fainting is a momentary inability to utilize your awareness, and complete suspension, meaning you cannot use your limbs. And he says, and pay attention, this happens a lot in things like saunas, okay, where the blood pressure drops and a person momentarily faints. Now, he says it is hammam. I said sauna. What's the difference? Doesn't hammam mean bathroom? No. Or back in his days, or maybe really just 100 years ago, a hammam, okay, it's like what they refer to today as the Turkish bathing rooms. All right, so it's like a sauna, high steam, which causes fluctuations in blood pressure, and you excessively relax, which can cause momentarily fainting. Another example for this is a very important example, Juan. Sometimes you might go to the doctor and they might be pulling blood or giving you an injection, and they struggle to find your vein, and you momentarily faint. It's literally, it could happen in under a minute where you literally faint and then wake up. Okay, that's a blood pressure issue. If that happens, you need to make wudu. And if it was a nurse taking your blood, as a Shafi'i, you're going to have to make wudu too, but that's for another reasons that we'll speak about shortly, inshallah ta'ala. The author says, وَمِنْ عَلَامَةِ النَّعَاسِ أو النُّعَاسِ عفوا بالضمة. Pay attention. In أثنى المطالب, Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari says, when you take the alif out, it's na'asa. When you put the alif in, it's nu'as بالضمة on the noon. تمام? And this sign of nu'as, being sleepy, all of the ashab agree to. It's hearing people speak around you even though you do not understand what they're saying, but you understand that people are speaking around you. Tamam. Now, I'm going to add something from Al al-Buwaiti that's really important. It's going to touch on something that we're going to cover in a moment, and that is having a vision in your sleep is a sign of sleep. Meaning, if you had a vision, then that's evidence that you have slept. But this is going to be problematic as to what we're going to speak about in a moment, inshallah ta'ala. Tamam. He says, لا زواله بنوم, meaning you will not break your wudu when you sleep قاعد, when you are sitting down. And this is a very important description. But let's add the next word, ممكن. Okay, even if possible, right? ممكن, meaning that you are sitting and you're secure in your position. And there's tamkeen. Tamkeen, that means you are fixed in the position that you are in. Tamkeen on what? Fixed on what? مقعده, the rear. The rear is fixed onto something. And your back is up straight. It's okay if it's leaning against something. He's going to say that right now. أي الييه, both sides of the rear, tamam, are on the ground, and your body weight, your upper body weight is pressing on them. Your back has to be up. Doesn't have to be 90 degrees straight, but it needs to be up. And that way the weight is on your waist and therefore on your rear, on what you're sitting on, whether it's a chair or on the floor. Does not matter. Tamam? Why? They said, our ashab say, because sitting that way blocks your body from releasing gas. In order to release gas in that, we're all grown-ups here, we know, you would have to move. You won't be able to do it in that position. Tamam? وإن أسند لما لو زال أو لما لو زال سقط. Even if I'm leaning against something that if it were to be removed, I would have fall down, I would fall back. So even if I'm relying on something for my back, the weight is still down because that reliance on my back, that's just keeping my back up. It's not carrying my weight. تمام? He says, أو احتبى. احتبى, it means, when you lift your legs up, you're sitting on the floor. Okay, so your rear is on the floor, your back is up, and you bring your legs up and your feet are on, or يعني, your legs are up and the feet are on the ground and the knees are up. And you're wrapping your arms or you're wrapping something around you to keep yourself in that position. That is also included in this scenario, in this surah. وَلَيْسَ بَيْنَ مَقْعَدُهُ وَمَقَرِّهِ تَجَافٌ. The idea, the point here is that between your rear and between what you're sitting on, right, there's no gaps. So your whole body weight is on your waist, on your rear, and your whole weight is fixated onto what you're sitting. In that scenario, with that description, with the condition that your full rear is on the ground, no gaps, and you fall asleep that way, your wudu is not broken. And they use the hadith from Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that the Sahaba radwanullah alayhim, they would come to the masjid, they would pray Tahiyat al-Masjid, and they would sit there, they're sitting up in their rows, waiting for the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. In one of the narrations in Sunan Abi Dawud, Sayyidina Anas, he describes it as يعني كأن على رؤوسهم الطير. Birds could have come and sat on their heads. That's how asleep they were. And then they would get up and they would pray and they would not make wudu, and the Prophet ﷺ did not order them to make wudu. However, Imam al-Muzani, he disagrees on this. He does not believe or envision that their sleep was that deep or actual sleep altogether. That might have just been slouched according to him. But Imam Shafi'i and all of the ashab agree to what we just said, that form of falling asleep in that scenario would definitely not break your wudu. Tamam. Now, there's other descriptions, or better yet, attempts from the ashab in trying to define the exact scenario or the exact sitting situation, up to there's actually 4 other scenarios presented by the ashab in trying to determining how to define that seating that they did that does not nullify wudu. And the one that I just shared is the mu'tamad and is the accepted one. All the other ones are questionable, or there's a problem with the definitions or how they were understanding it. Tamam. And most of which they were mentioned in Al-Aziz by our Imam al-Rafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. He says, وَيَنْتَقِدُ وُضُوءُ مُمَكَّنٍ انْتَبَهَ بَعْدِ زَوَالِ أَلْيَتَيْهِ. Say a person was sitting, right, and they moved in their sleep. But as they were moving, they're sliding down, they're about to lay down, they wake up. Now, when they opened up their eyes and they became alert from falling, right, they weren't in the position anymore. The position of what? Of sitting upright, of having the weight on their rear. Rather, they're halfway in the air. Therefore, their wudu is what? Is broken. Because when they came to it, when they realized what was happening, they were no longer in that position anymore. So now their wudu is muntaqid. بعد زوال ألييه أو أليتيه عفوا يقينا, because he opened his eyes when he was no longer in that upright position. عن مقره, from the place that he was sitting. لا, meaning لا ينتقد, the wudu is not nullified. وضوء شاك هل كان ممكنا أو لا. Person wakes up from the falling asleep in the seating position, and he's like, wait a minute, did I move? Did I move from my position? Yes or no? We don't tell him that he has broken his wudu because he has no certainty. And since there is no certainty, al-yaqeen la yazulu bishak. Certainty cannot be changed with doubt. He woke up and he was still in the seating position. Therefore, this assumption, this maybe that's come up in his head, we're going to say that has no value whatsoever. أو هل زالت اليتيه قبل اليقظة أو بعدها. Again, irrelevant, has no impact. No impact whatsoever. Okay? Why? Because when he woke up, he's in the position. And when he initially sat down, he was in the position. That's the certainty. Everything else is lack of certainty. And it has no value here. He says, وَتَيَقُّنُ الرُّؤْيَا مَا عَدَمِ تَذَكَّرِ نَوْمٍ لَا أَثَرَ لَهُ. Meaning خلافا للبغوي. Imam al-Baghawi said, no, this is not possible. Now pay attention to the scenario. A person has has full certainty that he saw what? A ru'ya, a vision. MashaAllah, mumtaz. But he doesn't remember going to sleep. Is his wudu valid or invalid? We say it has no impact. Why does it have no impact? Because you could have a vision while you're awake. So since that's the case, it would be there's too much uncertainty to say that wudu is an obligation. Al-Baghawi and others argued using what Imam Shafi'i said that I quoted to you earlier, that having a vision is a sign of sleep. We said, yes, normally having a vision is a sign of sleep, but there's also a vision that you can have when you're awake. It is possible. You could daydream. Now, is that called a ru'ya? Is daydreaming called a ru'ya or not? That's a matter for theologians to debate. But for the faqih, yeah, we're going to call it a ru'ya. Now, whether it's a good ru'ya or a bad ru'ya, or you just daydreaming, about that new car that you want to get, that's irrelevant to us. The point of the matter is that they are normally, all dreams are visions. And daydreaming is a vision, because the word vision just means that which you viewed in your head. So therefore, if someone comes and says, I had a vision, it doesn't really, okay, and I don't remember going to sleep. Okay, then maybe you were daydreaming. Maybe, I don't know, you wandered off so far that, you put yourself in a hypnotic state and started to see things. So there's a lot of possibilities, but you were never asleep. You were wide awake. Always possible. بخلافه مع الشك فيه. هذا مهم. بخلافه مع الشك في النوم. Remember the scenario. The person said, I don't remember sleeping. So that's not going to have an impact. But then another person says, I don't remember if I slept or not. Scenario's changed. Now he's going to have to make wudu. Why are you saying that now he has to make wudu? Because here he's saying he might have slept. This guy's saying, I don't remember sleeping. So a person comes to you, again, so you can connect with the scenario. A person comes to you and he says, what? I had a vision, mumtaz. But I don't remember sleeping. Okay, no wudu. A person comes and says, I had a vision. Okay, mumtaz. I don't remember if I slept or not. No, that's a big difference. Because the first one is eliminating sleep from the equation. So why am I going to break his wudu? The second one is saying, no, there's a possibility I did sleep. I just don't remember, but I probably did, but I don't remember. See the difference? And aside from the argument on the technical on whether or not ru'ya is a sign of sleeping or not, or if I'm going to separate ru'ya from daydreaming or hallucinating and so on, push that discussion aside. Look at how the fiqh scenario, the answer changes. I had a vision. I do not recall sleeping. There was no sleep. I didn't go to bed. I didn't sleep. I had a vision. I might have went to sleep. I just don't remember. So here he's giving a possibility of sleeping. The first one, there is no possibility of sleeping. See these fine details? So with that second one, we're going to say, yes, go make wudu. The first one, we're going to say, no. Maybe it was a hallucination. Maybe it was a daydream. He says, لِأَنَّهَا مُرَجَّحَةٌ لِأَحْدِ طَرَفَيْهِ. Meaning in the first example, there was sleep. There might have been sleep or not. No, there was no sleep. In the second scenario, it says there might have been sleep and there might not have been sleep. Now, you have two possibilities. The first one was one possibility. There was no sleep. Tamam? So you could have reworded the first one by saying تيقن الرؤيا وتيقن عدم تذكر نوم. He had certainty of that he had a vision, and he had certainty that he did not sleep. And then the second one, he had certainty of a vision, but he had no certainty of sleeping or not. He might have slept, and he might have not have slept. تمام? That's called ترجيح بأحد الطرفين, meaning ترجيح to one of the possibilities. Now there's possibilities. The first one didn't show possibilities. Look at that difference. Well, Imam al-Baghawi came and said, no, 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 no. If he had a vision, then without a doubt that he slept, because the Shafi'i said vision is a sign of sleeping. We said yes, and Imam Shafi'i is right, depending on what you mean by vision. Because if a person has a vision while they're awake, that's also called ru'ya. If you hallucinate and you see something, guess what that's called in Arabic? Called ru'ya. Somebody might come and say, no, that's called halwasa. I'll say, ya habibi, halwasa is an English word. We're talking about in Arabic. If they come and they say halwasa, then it's easy, because then that means they didn't sleep, right? But what if they don't know the word halwasa, right? Now, if they come to you in English and they say, I hallucinated, or I had a vision while I was awake, okay, well, خلاص, yani, issue's easy. Tamam? Now we're moving on to the third one. Let's just double check our time, inshallah ta'ala. The next is مس فرج الآدمي. مس فرج الآدمي, a human private part. Now, bear in mind, for us, it doesn't matter if it's your own private area, if it's someone else's, if they're an adult, if they're a child, if you're a doctor or a nurse and you had to, you didn't have gloves. That's another issue that we need to be discussing privately. If that's the case, you should be wearing gloves. It does not matter who it is, what it is. You're changing your child's diaper, and it could happen. That breaks your wudu. Yourself breaks your wudu. All scenarios, it always and will indefinitely break your wudu. Period. Tamam. ولو لميت أو صغير, even if the person is dead, but you don't have to give them another ghusl. It's just you have to make what? You have to do a shower. أو صغير, or a child, doesn't matter. قبلا كان الفرج أو دبرا, whether it's the front or the rear, it does not matter. متصلا أو مقطوعا, connected, or you work in the medical field and you work in the morgue, and there's body parts, and again, for some odd reason you're not wearing gloves. I do not know why. And it was a dismembered part. That also breaks your wudu. However, the ulama differed on when it would still have the name, meaning if it's just a piece of flesh and it can't be called the male part or the female part or the front part or the rear part, then it's just a piece of flesh and it does not break wudu. But if it is an obvious piece of it, right, where you can say, oh, this is it, then that breaks your wudu. Tamam? He says, إِلَّا مَا قُطِعَ فِي الْخِتَانِ. That's the qulfa. That's the foreskin from circumcision. Again, back to what I just said. If the foreskin alone, is it called the male private part? No, it isn't. And therefore, it does not break the wudu if it is touched. Tamam. And that's from the hadith from Busra ibn Safwan, that she heard the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, مَنْ مَسَّ ذَكَرَهُ فَلْيَتَوَضَّأ. It's narrated by Imam al-Shafi'i and al-Tirmidhi and Abu Dawud and others. But what about the other hadith, the hadith of talq? As for the hadith of إن هل هو إلا بضعة منك, it's just a part of you. You don't have to make wudu. That hadith, our ashab, they approached it in different ways. So some of them argued that this hadith's chain is weaker than the other one. There's a probability of that this hadith is therefore just weak. And that's one way to respond, but it's still authentic. So brushing it off to that seems to be problematic. Right? It's authentic. It's weaker than the other hadith that says whoever touches their private area, they have to make wudu. But it's still authentic. And we say weaker, we just mean that the narrators are not as strong. Not that it is weak within itself. Tamam. But some of them came and said, well, because it's saying the opposite of an authentic hadith, then that would render it weak. This is a form of تصحيح and تضعيف that the fuqaha utilize more than the muhaddithin is that if I have two authentic ahadith, one of them is on point and the other one is saying something opposite to what is known, and the status of its narrators is just a little bit below the other famous hadith that's stronger, they'll call it weak. And they don't mean it's weak sanadan. They mean it's weak in al-amal bihi. In al-amal bih. And inshallah ta'ala, after Ramadan, we're doing a course on Nuzhat al-Nadar. If that's something you're interested in, you can attend it inshallah ta'ala. I think we shared the flyer in the Shafi'i Center. Shaykh al-Islam, he mentions that some of our ashab came and argued, maybe it's mansukh. So there was the original rule that you touching a private part does not break, and then it was changed that it does break. But there's really not enough evidence to make that claim. Also, you have a little bit of issues on the dating. You see the hadith of من مس ذكره فليتوضأ could be, according to many muhaddithin, it came before هل هو إلا بضعة منك. So if you argue for nasikh and mansukh, you might be shooting yourself in the foot. Shaykh al-Islam, he mentions then that the more accurate approach is to look at it in their completion. You see, these hadith have a continuation. The one that he said that whoever touches their private area needs to make wudu, they came from their home and they asked that question. While the one that he said to him, it's part of you, meaning you don't have to make wudu, that person said, I touched myself in the prayer. Now, I want you to just think about this for a moment. Getting to a skin-to-skin contact with the private area in the prayer, that's going to be a struggle. Whether modern clothes or old clothes, maybe modern clothes it's a little bit easier since you have pants. But back then, tying things around your waist, if you were to go skin to skin, it would have loosened all of the clothes in the prayer, in the masjid. The person was in the masjid. So Shaykh al-Islam says, if you look at the context, these are two different scenarios altogether. And this one about in the prayer, more than likely the person was talking about over the clothes. Maybe he had an itch and he just itched himself. And that's what he was referring to. While the other one was coming from his home, which is obviously more in a private setting, more than likely skin to skin contact. What about people who come and they'll try to use certain hadith? We'll get to that inshallah ta'ala in the fourth one, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And we're going to go over those hadith that people claim that men and women touching does not break the wudu. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll respond to every single issue that they have there. Bi'idhnillah ta'ala. I want you to leave where you have all the weapons and all the understanding. He says, وَالنَّقْدْ مِنَ الدُّبُرْ مُلْتَقَى الْمَنْفَذِ. What breaks wudu from the rear is the exit point itself. That's it. Nothing around it. No, the exit point itself is what breaks the wudu when it comes to the rear. When it comes to the male front part, then it is basically the shaft itself is what nullifies. What about the sack? It does not nullify the wudu. It's only the shaft. Tamam. Well, what about in women? Tamam. He says, وَمِنْ قُبُلِ الْمَرْأَةِ مُلْتَقَى شَفْرَيْهَا عَلَى الْمَنْفَذِ لَا مَا وَرَائِهِمَا كَمَحَلِّ خِتَانِهَا. Now, there's a little bit of anatomy for you. So the female frontal part is divided into two entry points. The external one referred to as labia majora, and then the internal one that's called labia minora. Ibn Hajar states that it's the internal labia minora, okay, that nullifies the wudu. And therefore, the place where her circumcision will happen, it's outside of it, because where she has her circumcision falls under labia majora, the external parts. So Ibn Hajar will say the place basically where she were to urinate from, and also the external area of it would not nullify wudu if she touches it or someone touches it. Tamam. It's the internal labia manura that nullifies. While Imam al-Ramli said no, they both do. But for Imam al-Ramli, the way that he looks at it is that they meet like this. It would be the edges that nullify, not the outside part that gets shaven. No, it's the inside parts that close and meet and that are covered when not aroused. Tamam? He says na'am. And na'am here, this is an istidrak. Okay? He says yundabu. So why is he doing istidrak? Because he said you don't have to make wudu for something. He's saying yes. However, it is recommended to do wudu min massi nahwi al-ana, from touching the ana. That's the area that men shave above their private part. Tamam? That area, if it is touched, it is recommended that one makes wudu. وباطن الألية, يعني between the rear, not at the exit point, but between where they close. Tamam? والأنثيين, the full exterior, basically where a woman shaves. وشعر نبت فوق ذكر, so where a male shaves, and then he has his private area. In between them, right there on the edge, touching that hair, that would be recommended that you make wudu. And all of this was mentioned in Al-Rawda, mentioned in Al-Azkar, by Imam al-Suyuti and Ibn Hajar in his famous work called Tanbih al-Akhyar, his commentary on al-Suyuti's commentary on Al-Azkar by Imam al-Nawawi. He confirms this is the mu'tamad of the madhab. وَأَصْلُ فَغْذٍ, وَأَصْلُ فَغْذٍ, that means the upper inner thigh. وَلَمْسُ صَغِيرَةٍ, because remember I told you age doesn't matter. So changing your son's diaper and you had to clean them, or your daughter's diaper and you had to clean them, doesn't matter what gender. They could be the mother doing it, it could be the father doing it. And they had to clean. It happens. I'm a parent. We get on with it, right? If your hand were to touch, then you would have to in the area that breaks your wudu, that would break your wudu. If it's around or near the area, then it would be recommended that you do wudu. I'd wash my hands as many times as possible and make wudu after changing a diaper. وأمرد. Amrad is a young boy that still has very somewhat innocent / feminine features. Okay. And the reason why is that there are a lot of sick people in the world that look at these young boys and have desire in their heart. This is sad, but it's true. So there's always been a nervousness, a wariness from scholars about people who tend to excessively hang around youth at this phase. Why are you doing it? Unless you're their father, you're their caregiver, you're their teacher, why? It's suspect. And it's usually right before they start getting facial hair and stuff like that. They still have features that sick people have sick thoughts. Nas'Allah al-afiyah. Now, we normally don't really take that stuff into consideration. There's plenty of sick people in the world with sick thoughts. We normally don't entertain it, and we don't give rules for it. It's just that this concept was so prevalent back in the old days, and it's still prevalent in many countries, in Pakistan, in India, in Afghanistan, sadly, and some Arab nations as well. And some communities, they'll even have these young boys sing, and sometimes things go even further than that. All of these things are haram. All of these things are major kaba'ir. And for these young boys that might be just looking for a living, so you're torturing fellow Muslims. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. These are criminal acts, and they would be criminal charges under Islamic law. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. وأبرص. And really anyone with skin issues, touching them would be recommended to make wudu. Baras, it goes back to leprosy. You want to stay far from anyone with contagious skin issues, even though we fully believe that what you getting contagious or not, that's by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But still, you want to be cautious. So it's always recommended that if you do come in contact with someone with a skin issue, an infection, contagious or not, that you make wudu wash your hands, and so on. وَيَهُودي, and also a Christian. You might say, why? Why is it sunnah? Why is it recommended to make wudu if I come in contact or I touch a Jew or a Christian? It's because, well, first and foremost, لا يحرمون ما حرم الله. They do not follow the rules of that which is clean and that which is filthy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set forth. So you don't know. They urinated and didn't clean themselves. Tamam. I mean, these people go to the bathroom and they, a lot of times they don't even wash their hands. They have intercourse and they don't shower. And Christians, they eat and drink. Jews, they drink. So you don't know whether there's khamr or there's alcohol in something. You don't know whether there's khinzir on something. And so it's better safe than sorry if you do have to come in contact with these people that I recommend personally on a personal level, do a ghusl. You come home from work and you had to be with these people, do a full ghusl, and if you can afford having a different outfit every day, for work, I'd go ahead and do it. Just do it. It's just safer for the heart. And I'm not trying for you to get a waswasa. No, I don't want you to have waswasa. Just staying away from them. Tamam. And the same thing, anyone that does ibadah bi najasa, at-ta'abbud bin najasa. So we know that there's many people that glorify cow urine, right, and other things. So how do you know that they didn't leave their house in the morning with taking urine in their hands? This, of course, then brings a discussion. Don't some of the madhab say the urine and feces of certain animals that we use as fertilizer and stuff like that are animals that we eat as tahir? Yeah, sure. There are some ulama that do make that argument. Not Shafi'i ulama. Not Shafi'i ulama. Yes, sure. Some of them do. But we do not recognize that. And even if you do say it's tahir, it's nasty. It's disgusting. I mean, I'm a farmer. I do a lot of farming, and I use casting from worms and different creatures. Yeah, I'm gonna wash my hands. I'm gonna clean my hands. I'm gonna make sure I'm clean after using that, because for one, it's disgusting. And even if you want to argue whether it's najis or not, that's a secondary discussion. For one, it's filthy. It's disgusting. So wash their hands. But these people might not wash their hands from these things. Tamam. So we want to, at least, when I'm done my day of work, or if I'm going into salah and I was dealing with them, I might as well just go ahead and make sure I'm extra clean. ومن نحو فصد, and all of the above mentioned in شرح المهذب by Imam al-Nawawi, الروضة by Imam al-Nawawi, التحفة by Ibn Hajar, and some of the books that I mentioned earlier, such as تنبيه الأخيار فيما وقع في الأذكار by Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, his commentary on Imam Suyuti's work. فصد and hijama, really you can include hijama, really any minor medical procedure, whether it's bloodletting, whether it's cupping, whether it's donating blood, whether it's drawing blood for like lab work and things like that. Do wudu for all of that. وَنَظَرٍ بِشَهْوَةٍ, and looking at a person with desire in the heart. وَلَوْ إِلَى مَحْرَمٍ, وَلَوْ إِلَى مَحْرَمٍ, even if it was wrong, it's still recommended that you go ahead and do it. We're not speaking about there being any release of any fluids, like pre-semen. No. We're just talking about it happened, because we're talking about that which is sunnah. If there was pre-semen, then wudu is wajib. That's different. Cleaning yourself and wudu becomes what? Becomes wajib. He says, وَتَلَفُّظٌ بِمَعْصِيَةٍ, anything bad saying, lying, saying bad words, cussing, any of that. It is recommended that you go ahead and make wudu. وَغَضَب, the Prophet ﷺ said what? The ghadab is from the shaitan, and the shaitan is from fire, and nothing puts out fire like water. Tamam, that's recommended. Definitely recommended. If someone gets you aggravated or upset, that you go ahead and make wudu before reacting so you can calm down. وَحَمْلِ مَيِّتٍ, carrying the dead. وَمَسِّهِ, as a matter of fact, there is a hadith, but it's from Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and it's a very, very early hadith, early in Islamic history, and it states that it used to be the rule that whoever carries the dead has to make wudu, and whoever washes the dead has to make ghusl. But the law was changed. The law was changed, and there's other hadith clarifying that. But we would still say that it's recommended that you do so. تمام, that recommendation remains. وقص ظفر, trimming your nails. وشارب, trimming your mustache. The mu'tamad in the Shafi'i school is not to shave your mustache. Okay, you can lighten it, so trim it overall, but the actual sunnah for the Shafi'iyah is that you trim it above the upper lip. That's the mu'tamad of the Shafi'iyya. In other schools, they have other views, but that's for the Shafi'iyya. Tamam. It's okay if you were to shave it off or trim it down really, really light, but just note that the Shafi'iyya, for example, we don't consider that the actual sunnah that we were asked to do. Inshallah ta'ala, you're getting the word of sunnah for trimming. It's just that you kind of went too far. As a matter of fact, some of our ashab actually went as far as saying that that might be khilaf al-awla, the shaving down might be khilaf al-awla, meaning that it's opposite to the priority. He says, وَحَلْقِ رَأْسِهِ, getting a haircut, it would be sunnah as well. وَخَرَجَ بِآدَمِ, meaning the private part of an Adami, of a human, فَرْجِ الْبَهِيمَةِ, the farj of a behima, of an animal, like cattle, sheep, lamb, uh, camels, so on. إِذْ لَا يُشْتَهَى, يعني there's no desire in it, except for maybe something mentally challenged people. But we automatically understand this because we don't have in the Sharia where it says you can't look at it. It doesn't say that it needs to be covered. Nothing was ever said like that about private areas of these animals, and therefore they're not treated the same, and the same rules do not apply to them. So you can look at it. I mean, I don't know why you want to, unless you're a doctor or you're a shepherd and you're making sure they're healthy. But you can look at it. They don't need to be covered, and also touching it would not nullify wudu. He says, بِبَطْنِ كَفٍ. There's another narration where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man afda." And ifda has to do with batn al-kaf. تمام. He says, لقوله, he's mentioning another hadith, لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم من مس فرجه وفي رواية من مس ذكرا فليتوضأ. Okay, this is mess, it's not lams. تمام. And in the next naqid, the next nullifier, we'll speak about the difference between mess and lams, inshallah ta'ala. He says, وَبَطْنِ الْكَفِّ هُوَ بَاطِنِ الرَّاحَتَيْن. This is the batin, the inner palm. Okay, الراحتين, so we have two of them as humans, right? وَبَطْنِ الْأَصَابِعِ, and the inner part of fingers. وَالْمُنْحَرِفِ إِلَيْهِمَا عِنْدَ إِطْبَاقِهِم, not the sides, the edges. And I'm going to explain right now. عند طباقهما مع يسير تحامل. Here's your ضابط. Take one hand and you put it against the other hand. Each finger on its opposite finger, completely, right? Everything that you cannot see, it is that part, if it touches a private area, that's what breaks wudu. If you do it with the back of the hand, that does not break your wudu. So you're getting out of the shower, you forgot to dry something off, something in particular, and you want to use the towel and use the back of your hand, that does not nullify your wudu. Tamam? It does not. It's only that which you cannot see when you do this. This is the dhabit of all of the ulama of the Shafi'iyya have stated it. Tamam? Now, what you cannot see is that which breaks the wudu if it comes in contact with the private area. This was stated by Imam al-Shafi'i, it's stated by Al-Muzani, it's stated by Al-Buwaiti, it's stated by Al-Bandaniji, Al-Mahamili, Abu Tayyib al-Tabari, Abu Hamid al-Isfaraini, Abu Ishaq al-Isfaraini, all of Ashab al-Awjuh, Ammat al-Ashab. As a matter of fact, I have not really come across a real difference of opinion. There are some arguments to add additional parts, like the size of the finger. But this is the mu'tamad that everyone agrees to. The secondary about what to extend that to, يعني that's there, but it is not mu'tamad. There's arguments for it. دون رؤوس الأصابع, not the tips of the finger. وحرف الكف, meaning عفوا, حرف الكف will be right here, this side. So your inner part, the tip of the finger, and the side does not nullify if it were to come in contact. Only the inner palm and inner fingers. That's it. And if you're unsure, put your hands against each other, and what you cannot see is what nullifies your wudu. There's a lot that we want to cover in this next one. What I'm going to do, let's go ahead and we're just going to stop here, inshallah ta'ala. Okay? We'll stop here and we'll pick up from الناقد الرابع إن شاء الله تعالى in our next class, a little bit early today. فأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.